Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. As always, here with my co-host Steve Flink. We're edging our way to the end of the year, the WTA official calendar. I know there's still some tennis being played, but the WTA Finals have been complete. On the men's side, we just finished the last Masters 1000 event. We still have their year-end championships to go. But I will start with this, Steve. This was not the best of weeks for both the WTA and the ATP Tour, and we'll get into the details about that. But at the end of the day, you know, we say the cream rises to the top, right? And in WTA Finals, it was Iga Swiatek, and in the Rolex Paris Masters event, I mean, why not? Why not be anyone other than Novak Djokovic?
Yeah, no, that was the good news from both events, and that she sealed the number one ranking for the second year in a row. She passed Sabalenka at the last hurdle, beat her in the semis, and that was critical. And then she won the final and got number one for the second year in a row. And he's on the verge of an eighth year-end number one ranking, which is astonishing. All he would really need to do in turn is win one match, or Carlos loses one match, because he's 1,490 points ahead. And you can only win 1,500 points for winning every match in turn, all your round robins and semis and finals. So he's on the verge of sealing that. So that was definitely the best. That was the best news coming out of this past week, was the supremacy of Djokovic and Swiatek.
Yeah, let's start with the WTA Finals, and we'll kind of lay the land here. Way too many 6-love, 6-1 sets when you're talking about the top 8 players in the world. Also, the rain. I mean, the torrential downpours. I don't know if you ever got an answer to this, and we'll talk about the lopsided sets in a second, but why were the players still in their chairs with the torrential downpour and the winds? Was there nowhere else that they could have gone? I mean, you rarely see that in any other outdoor tournament. It starts to rain. If it's any pretty heavy downpour, they're out of there.
No, it depended on the match, but it wasn't really fully explained by the announcers. I'm sure the players had their reasons. I can't believe they were being, with the rain of that kind of force, that they were being forced to stay there. But the other thing to add, David, to what you said, which is all absolutely right, is the winds were just miserable. So not only would you sometimes have 2-3 rain delays in a match and 20 minutes of play and then a 10-minute rain delay and back again, all that disruption, but the wind was murder. Sometimes 25 miles an hour or more. It was really difficult conditions, which was, I felt very sorry for the players. You're showcasing the 8 best women in the world, and they were times made to look. It reminded me of a couple of US Open matches I saw, including one with Federer and Andre Agassi, where great players are made to look almost pedestrian, because they can cope with moderate winds, even somewhat heavy winds, but these were impossible wins. So the combination of that and the rain, you just had to feel for those poor players, plus a court that wasn't producing the truest of bounces either.
You're talking about the winds when they actually had to play through it. There's the video of Coco sitting there in the with the umbrella over her head, and the thing just inverted and snapped right away. It reminds me a lot of my walks to work in downtown Chicago when it's freezing and it's windy. The umbrella, it doesn't stand a chance. You look at the garbage bins and the umbrellas filled to the brim with it. It was a really rough, tough week for the players. Again, the 6-love, 6-1. I mean, there were some routes in there, and it just shouldn't happen with the best players in the world. To me, and I've said this a few times, Iga, to me, in any draw, is my pick. Now, again, I know on grass, that is her weakest surface. Maybe that's not your pick when you're dealing with a grass court event, but I'm still looking at a draw, and we know there's a lot of players who had really, really good years. I'm still picking Iga to come out of it, and she showed that this week.
Oh, she did. I guess 20 games lost, the fewest lost ever by a WTA champion since they went to the round robin format. So that's basically a 20-year period, and she was back in that dominant mode that we've seen her went back like when she won her first French. And when Iga's in that mood and striking the ball that impeccably, she would, there's no question she's the player to beat. The mystery to me, David, and by the way, just one quick comment. Totally agree. And you and I talked about the fact that there were far too many love and ones and one and loves and inexplicable at that level. The final is is a different story. Pegula obviously didn't play her best, but this was much more about a top of the line Swiatek. She was sheer perfection that day, and I felt like poor Pegula, there was really nothing she could have done. Could she maybe have squeezed out a few more games? You could argue that, but I never felt she gave up. She's one of the fiercest competitors out there, very prideful. And I just think she met Swiatek at her very, very best. And it's easily the best match she's played in all of 2023. So unfortunately, Pegula crossed paths with her on the wrong day. The other matches are another story, but the final, I think, was much more about the perfection of Swiatek than it was about the vulnerability of Jess Pegula.
How about Jess Pegula? I saw a stat, the only player to face number 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the world in the same tournament since WTA and the Open Air since what, 1975, I believe.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, and 4. She faced obviously the toughest one in the final. Didn't go her way, but I mean, to get to the final, and she had a great year. And I know we're all still, waiting for her to surpass the quarterfinal of a slam. And I think you would agree with me. Only time will tell, hopefully. They're getting to be stiffer competition up the top, but she's too solid and too consistent where I think she will break through that quarterfinal mark. It's only a matter of time.
There's no doubt about it. And listen, on the positive side of things, yes, she got obliterated in the final, but she beat Coco 2-1. She beat Sabalenka very easily. She didn't lose a set on the way to the final herself. That tells you something, because she'd been the player in form just as much as Swiatek. So she can take that away, the fact that she had those big wins along the way, and the final didn't go the way she wanted, but she's shown. She beat Iga herself a few times this year. She beat Coco a couple of times. She's had a lot of wins over top players. There isn't any one player that can dominate her match in, match out. So that's reassuring to Pegula. The final didn't go her way, but she knows how well Iga played on that particular day.
And I don't want to get too much into like the summary of the year, because we'll do our year-end segment, and I know we're going to have a lot of thoughts on the women's players throughout the year. Obviously, the highlight for the Americans was Coco winning the Open, especially after what she endured after losing a first round at Wimbledon. A lot of questions out there, and then she hires 2 new coaches to her team. Brad Gilbert is still with her now, and I mean, just the crazy run that went on in the summer, continuing through New York. We'll get more of that into that in our year end. Let's move on to the Rolex Masters, because that had also some quirks to it. And I mean, one of the unfortunate things, Yannick Sinner, he finished so late. They put him on a day session. It was a little bit later in the day, but it was still a day session the next day. He just couldn't recover. Just for just for the listeners, just to conceptually talk about this, some of the late matches on Monday, they finished at 2:22 a.m. On Tuesday, they finished early, 11:57 p.m. Wednesday was 2:37 a.m. Thursday was 12:04 a.m. and Friday was 12:59 a.m. I mean, that's just too much, Steve.
Well, David, guess who got the 2:37 a.m.? That was Sinner.
Right.
And it was impossible for him to think about coming back and playing, as you say, late the next afternoon. He was not going to have nearly enough rest. Very bad luck. I think, frankly, a very wise decision from him. Unfortunate for the tournament, but he's got Turin to think about now, playing in front of his home country's fans. And that was too bad, because he'd come off the win in Vienna over Medvedev in the final. Won a couple of tournaments this fall. He's really been hot. And that was too bad that his tournament had to end in that fashion. But we got some dramatic not results, but we got some really compelling stuff later on, and mainly because of Novak. Because Novak, he was almost victimized by a stomach bug. And so after a routine win in his first match against Echeverry from Argentina, he then was in real trouble against Grigor, and he lost the first set, and he looked like a zombie, up 4-1, lost the set, and then the second went to a tiebreak, and he played a first-rate tiebreaker, and then eventually won 6-4 in the third, but not before the score was locked at 4-all, and then he buckled down and won the last 2 games. And then he still felt like he was feeling a little better against Holger Rune, who beat him in the final a year ago. Rune is the only player to ever beat him in final of a Masters 1000 when Novak has won the first set, and he did that a year ago. So that was interesting because Boris Becker being in Holger's camp now, and Novak's former coach, and Rune playing better again after a terrible slump post Wimbledon. And that match, Novak looked a little healthier, but it still went 3 long sets, and he almost had it in straight. Was up a set in 5-4, and 4-5. Rune was serving to stay in the match, and he saved it with a service winner, and eventually won that in a tiebreak. One of Novak's few poor tiebreakers of the year, and he said he thought it was his worst. But then he comes back and wins that 6-4 in the third. He looked like he was feeling a little bit better, but then you saw in the semis against Rublev, you could see again in the first set the way he was walking around, that he was really struggling with this thing. It was just obvious in his movement and his mannerisms, the lack of that intensity, or not emotive. There were a lot of telltale signs. But he came from a set down against Rublev, and again, he wins the second in another great tiebreaker, 7 points to 3, where he gave away nothing, and he had an ace in there, and that's some incredible defense, and it was really about as well as he could play. And then he got the trainer out after the second set, but had to get his back rubbed because he'd strained his back. Luckily, that turned out to be insignificant, and he eventually won 7-5 in the third there. But so he's playing these 3-hour matches one after another. But finally, in the final against Grigor Dimitrov, he wins the routine 4-3. 12 out of 13 he's won against Igor now in their careers. But it was no routine tournament. I don't think Djokovic has ever had to play that many matches where he's had a stomach bug, something that's been plaguing him and sapping his energy day after day after day. And he said after the final, David, that he really couldn't keep any food down. He would have 1 meal a day, and he tried to just have a lot of liquids. That he thought that's the best way to combat a stomach problem, is just keep hydrating. But he couldn't eat much, and you could see that at times the weakness, and it was just very obvious he wasn't feeling well at various junctures of those matches. But in the end, I think the incentive was Carlos lost early. He lost his opening match.
Are you concerned about Carlos right now? He
bit.
said it's a very long year. Are you concerned about his health, and do you think he'll be healthy for Turin?
Hard to tell, because he admitted that he didn't feel he was 100% yet, and he's got this foot problem, a little bit of a foot problem, and then another muscle injury that he was nursing in his rear end. I mean, there was no one obvious thing. You couldn't tell because he didn't talk in detail about it, but it obviously was disappointing to him to have a few weeks off and come back and lose that match. So that Djokovic was then able to, by winning the tournament, picking up 1,000 points, he went from a 500-point lead to nearly 1,500, and that's why he's on the verge of sealing that number. So I think, frankly, a lot of the incentive for him over the course of the week was just his normal pride, but also, okay, I can really distance myself from Carlos now, and then that makes for Djokovic, Turin becomes much more about winning Turin than worrying about number one, because that should be settled fairly quickly, one would think. It'll only take one win in the round robin. It might even be his first match, and I'm sure he's hoping it will be. And then it's all about just focusing on the tournament. But I don't know what to expect from Carlos. I really don't. He has not won a tournament since Wimbledon. Most of those losses, David, were, you could say, certainly justifiable.
Right. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind after Wimbledon was the Cincy final against Novak.
And epic. And that was actually the best he played in all those defeats by far. And he had a match point against Novak in the second set tiebreak, lost it eventually down to the wire in the third set tiebreak. And then he lost, obviously, and he had lost the week before that, lost to Tommy Paul, a bit surprising. And then he loses to Medvedev, but Medvedev is Medvedev. And even though he had crushed Daniel a couple of times early in the year, you can understand that. But then, since then, up and down, losing to Sinner, losing to Grigor, and now this loss to the young Russian player. And it's been a tough road for him. And, maybe he's tried to play through these injuries too much. And he still looks so good in most of these cases in terms of mobility and the agility and the shot making, that sometimes maybe that obscures what he's really feeling inside. So I hope, all I'll say is this, David, I hope he should only play Turin if he feels like he really is 100%, because the danger is he does something to himself. He gets injured worse by playing day after day against the top players. At least in this case, it was over within one match in Paris. Then he has the time to try to get to 100% physically, virtually a 2-week stretch. But if he needs to be very confident about his physical state, or I don't see what the point of even going through with it. Yes, you want to play against the top players, but not if you're not feeling your best, not if you feel like you could go out there and lose 2 or 3 matches, or perhaps exacerbate whatever injuries you've got right now. So that'll be very interesting to see what he decides to do. And that if he does stay in, how does he look in those first couple of matches? Because they're not going to be any easy ones.
No, there's no easing your way into this tournament. I can say that much.
No.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me that he did say, this has been a long year, and I think him and his team will kind of strategize, maybe do something, tweak a few things to his schedule, not only just for next year, but the future. Because again, the type of tennis he plays is very physical type of tennis, and hopefully their team can strategize and he can keep healthy here on out.
Yeah, I hope so. The thing is, though, I didn't feel like, and especially with some of the unexpected defeats, it didn't seem like he really played excessive amount of tennis. And his year started late because he couldn't play in Australia. He was already injured then. And then he comes back and plays a couple of those clay court tournaments prior to the hard court swing in Indian Wells, Miami. But I felt all the way through, well, it's a pretty sensible schedule. He's getting his rest weeks in. And right up until the fall, it seemed like he was okay. Now, maybe there were some nagging, niggling injuries, as they call them. But overall, he was holding up okay, and seemingly he was all right. But now it's caught up with him again. And that's why the Turin decision will be an important one for him.
No, I agree. I agree with that sentiment. Yeah, look, I think we would be doing a big disservice to our listeners if we did not stress the great play of Grigor Dimitrov. I mean, my gosh, he has turned back the clock, Steve. I think arguably this is the best tennis he's played throughout his career. And he's had many highlights. I know he hasn't won a slam. Again, look at the generation he's had to compete against. But I mean, 2013 was a great year. 2017 was a great year. He's had several really good years. This is the first time he reaches back-to-back Masters semis for the first time since 2014. I think that was. He's had an incredible few weeks and really, really good year.
Yeah, and you look at the wins that he's had. He had Shanghai, he knocked off. He beat Carlos there. That was another one of Carlos' lost, but he played a great match. And you look at this week where he beat Medvedev and Hurkacz before, and finally Tsitsipas in the third set tiebreak. Beats both Medvedev and Tsitsipas. He beat in final set tiebreaks, and then he loses to Novak. But those were great performances. And so you look at that level, and I do believe it equals or surpasses anything he's done before. 17 was a bit of a window. Djokovic was hurt. He wasn't in the year-end championships. Grigor played a great year-end championships and won it. He took advantage of opportunities, but I'm not sure his level isn't even higher now. So I think, there's a shot we could see him next year. If he has a good start to the year, push his way into that top 10. And, I think he's very excited about the ground he gained over the latter stages of the season after really only a so-so year up until then. But
physically, he looks great, Steve. He doesn't look physically, he looks really, really good.
Yeah, he does. And he had that leg taped up, but it didn't matter. The mobility was obviously very precautionary because the way he moved was spectacular.
Yeah.
So you could tell by the way he talked and the emotion he conveyed, how proud he was of what he'd done, and the joy and the jumping for joy after the Tsitsipas match, which he closed out in a tiebreak with 4 incredible winners, 3 passing shots and another point where he took the net away from Stefanos and ended up putting away an overhead himself on the bounce. So, played a perfect tiebreak to finish him off, a great tiebreak to finish off Medvedev. And he just was outclassed by Novak. And Novak by then, he said by Sunday, he felt a little better. He was better than he had been. So you could see that he was also determined to get it done and straight. And he just couldn't make any impression on Novak's serve. He never had a break point in the match. But that's no disgrace. That's Djokovic. doesn't take away from everything that he achieved leading up to it. And I'm excited about what he might do in the early, well, really all through the 2024 campaign. He can be a factor.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking forward to seeing how Grigor does as well in 2024. A few concluding thoughts. I know you and I probably discussed this maybe a couple years ago when Roger was still playing full time on tour. But Novak now has 97 titles and Roger has 103, and the record holder is Jimmy Connors at 109. And I remember a couple of years ago, we're like, Roger's going to have a shot. Roger's going to have a definite shot. Obviously, things health-wise, his knee, we didn't know that was going to maybe cut his career a little bit short, him not able to catch Jimmy. Novak at 97, Novak has said many times he wants to attain every single record that's out there. 109 is in the back of his head.
Well, here's the thing, David. This year, Djokovic coming into Turin, he's played 11 tournaments. 11. He won 6 of the 11. When you can be that that efficient and effective, when you schedule yourself as carefully as he does, and who knows, he maybe wins his 7th title of the year and his seventh tournament of the year and his 7th title at the ATP Championships in Turin. Who knows? He's the favorite. But the way I look at it is win or lose in Turin, there's a couple of big years ahead for him. He clearly should pass Roger. The question's going to be when he starts getting up in that 105, 6, 7 range, can he do it in the next 2 years? And is he going to would he definitely play 3 more years? I don't know. I think it's dependent on how, if he still feels the same motivation that he does now. And would it be enough to keep him around? For instance, if he got to 107 or 108,
he's continuing. He's playing.
Would he play on the next year just for that? He might. He'd be very worthy of it, because here's what I'll say. Rogers was an extraordinary achievement in his era, and Novak's is in his. Connors was a great player and immensely consistent year in, year out. But historians know that there were some cheap titles in there. This is not to knock Jimmy, but there was a period in the mid-'70s when almost all the best players, almost all the guys in the top 20 were playing WCT, World Championship Tennis Tour, run by Lamar Hunt. And Jimmy played on the Bill Reardon Tour. Bill Reardon was his manager, and Bill had sort of entertaining kind of, he got to some different places in different cities, but many of those fields were really quite weak. So Jimmy's record is a bit padded. I don't want to say completely, because so many of those titles, including 8 majors, are phenomenal achievements. But there is that to consider. Nonetheless, they counted. They're worthy. They were pro tournaments. All I'm saying is some of those Reardon tournaments were comparable to 250s, and in some cases, I might even say they were almost lesser grade than ATP 250s, just to put it in perspective. Having said that, can't take the achievement away from him. It was hard earned over many, many years, and it was the product of his consistency and his great all-court prowess. But I do think, Novak closing in on it, but obviously ideally he could get it done in the next 2 years, and he just might. If he won, say, 7 tournaments next year and 6 the following year, then he's there. So he's in a great spot right now to be at 97. So
my prediction, Steve, is if he's close, even if he doesn't get in 2 years, if he's close to that 109, he will continue on, just because of what he stated as far as getting as many records possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And this one wasn't at the top of his list, but it'll get more and more interesting to him and more motivating to him as he gets closer. The question would be, if he'd added a bunch more majors in the next few years, and he's starting to run out of that limitless willpower and ambition. Let's just say that he's tied with Connors, wins 12 more titles over the next 2 years. I don't know if he necessarily hangs around to break it, because he would know that he had the major title record, and this was his 40th Masters 1000, which is ridiculous, and he'll know he had so many other feathers in his cap, plus this soon to be 8th year-end #1 ranking, Plus that if he gets that year end, he'll also go over 400 weeks at number one because it'll carry over into the off season into next year. So he'll get beyond 400 weeks. So all of these things are going to be already in his collection. So whether it would be enough if he were tied at the end of 2025 to make him play another year, I don't know. But I do think it'll make him extra motivated week in, week out as the coming year comes, whenever he's playing, to think that each title is getting him closer. And the first thing he wants to do is get to 100. That would be very satisfying. Then the next is pass Roger, get to 104, and then he'll start setting his sights on Connors. But I just don't know whether he'd hang around an extra year just for that.
He'll be at 108 and he'll start playing a couple 250s just to surpass him, Steve.
Never know. Could be. Could be.
I do want to end this episode on a serious thought. And Steve, you're closer to this person more than others, obviously because you wrote a great book on him, Pete Sampras Greatness Revisited. Pete recently came out with a statement about the health of his wife. To me, I kind of read the statement. I'm hoping it's true that she's his wife, Bridget Wilson, is more on the recovery mode. Again, I don't know anything personal about Pete or Bridget, but how I interpreted the statement, it sounded that she was at this stage more in the recovery mode. Let's hope that is true, but sending good vibes, sending prayers to the Sampras family. And again, you want to get a better look on Pete, his career, definitely go check out my co-host's book that he wrote with Pete Sampras Greatness Revisited. And Steve, I know you echo my thoughts. I'll let you add any.
Oh, absolutely. No, listen, we're all pulling for him, and that's what issuing the statement. He was just kind of looking for good vibes and prayers and good feelings. And I'm glad he was able to get that out into the public domain. And that must be something of a relief just to do that. And listen, he's a good man, and I established a rapport with him going back into the early 90s and enjoyed writing the book, and we've always gotten along really well, and I feel for him as we all do. But I think I'm sure she's in very good care, and I got to believe she is making progress. So I really wish them both all the best.
We're all thinking about you, Pete, and the Sampras family. So with that, Steve, thanks again for your time. And we got a couple more in us before the end of the year. We're getting there.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to talking after. I mean, touring, there's certainly going to be some dynamic matchups there because you just look at it, David. I mean, so you're going to split up Carlos and Novak, assuming Carlos does play. You split up Novak and Carlos. You split up Medvedev and Sinner, and then you got, the likes of Tsitsipas and Zverev and Holger Rune making his debut, and Rublev is right in there too. So these groups are going to be strong. We're guaranteed good matchups. And so especially those first couple of rounds, I think that's always the most interesting part of the tournament in a lot of ways. When these guys play their first two matches, when everybody is still eligible, they haven't been knocked out yet. And so every match has such weight and importance. So I'm looking to go. So there's some matchups that just should be magnificent. And
yeah, I'm thinking we'll have a few less 6-0, 6-1 shellackings in this group as well.
The other thing is that last year the court was very, very fast. I assume it still will be this year. It was a real server's court. So that is also going to almost ensure a lot of 7-5, 7-6 sets. Guys are going to be holding serve. It's going to be quick conditions, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And Sinner will be particularly interesting to watch there because it either can propel him or cripple him, is the way I look at it. In the sense that you don't want to disappoint the fans. They could lift you to rare heights, and maybe he has a great run. Or if for some reason, if he doesn't win his first match and he's feeling it in the second, he just does not want to let them down. But at the very least, he wants to be in the semifinals. And on form, he should be the way he's played this fall. He should win 2 out of 3 matches in his group and get to the semis. But easier said than done.
Yeah, especially with this crew. Well said. Looking forward to seeing it. I want to thank you again for your time. This was fun.
Thanks, David. Enjoyed it.